Welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Wales Brown. Our guest today is Victor Tiffany. Victor, you are the founder of an organization. What is the organization called?
Revolt Against Plutocracy,
And when did you found it?
2015.
In connection with the Sanders campaign?
Right. We needed an organization to serve as a foundation for our strategy.
Okay. And you say ours, so you were a group of people.
It's a committee of anywhere from 3 to 7, 8 people.
All here in Ithaca or
No
across
one's here
the country?
in Ithaca, just me, all across the country.
Okay. And we can describe you as a longtime political activist.
Correct, yeah.
So this is not the first a campaign you've been involved in?
Not even close.
Okay. Well, you founded this organization in 2015, 2016, with the purpose of helping out the Sanders campaign, and you can tell a bit about what you did back then, but I'm interested in hearing about your reading of the voting public now and how they may vote
Sure.
in the coming election.
I'm going to make some claims that are going to sound hard to believe, perhaps, for people who really want a woman in the White House or really think Joe Biden is the guy to defeat Donald Trump. So everything I'm going to say is backed up by references on our website, climate2020.us, as in United States.
Climate2020.us.
So I'm going to talk about polling data. It's visualized in the video there, and then there's links to every bit of the information that I'm going to convey, because what I'm going to convey is pretty hard for some people to believe. What we looked at this year, or last year, I keep forgetting this is 2020.
This is 2020, yes.
What we looked at is a survey of Bernie Sanders supporters, people who voted for him in the primaries of 2016, and how they voted in the general election. 78% of Sanders supporters voted for Hillary Clinton, giving her the popular vote. 12% of Sanders supporters voted directly for Donald Trump. 8% voted for third party. That's the Bernie or bust faction. And 2% stayed home.
Okay, Bernie or bust defined as either you nominate Bernie or else.
We're voting Green Party in 2016. It was also a write-in option, but they weren't included in the survey, or they just threw them in with a third party. What they showed further along in that survey is in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and in Pennsylvania, those Sanders-Trump swing voters were more numerous than Trump's margin of victory. In other words, they could have claimed responsibility for the defeat of Clinton or for Trump's victory. They could have claimed responsibility for that.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't, because there's no organization. Like Bernie or bust has an organization, Revolt Against Plutocracy. Those swing voters have no organization. They're like a force of nature, like a tornado. You know, someone asked me, how are we going to stop them? And it's like getting up on your rooftop and yelling at a tornado coming your way, move, change direction, don't come this way. You can't.
Mm-hmm.
I think of them as dark matter because they were completely invisible to us in 2016. We had no idea that they were there. We had no idea that these swing voters, these Sanders supporters who would vote for Trump, existed in any sort of numbers. But in fact, in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, there was enough of them to cause Trump to get elected.
Have you found out anything about their motives? Did they do it out of spite?
There might have been a little bit of spite, but if that were primary, then they'd be gone, right? There wouldn't be as many today as there were then. And I'm going to talk about 2019 polling, but before I do, these swing voters, first of all, they're a subsidiary of a larger group of Obama. They voted for Obama twice and voted for Trump. So there's even more of them.
Mm-hmm.
And what we think is they're working class people who have given up on the Democratic Party. And if the Democratic Party wants these swing voters back, they're going to have a working class hero as the nominee. And I'm going to make the case that if Bernie Sanders is not the nominee, these swing voters make it impossible for Biden or Warren or Buttigieg or Bloomberg or Booker or anyone else to defeat Donald Trump. It's going to take somebody who's going to unify the Democratic Party. But before I get into the 2019 polling, I just want to make a point about swing voters. Go back to 2008.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton had 25% of the people who voted for her in the primaries vote for John McCain. 25%. That's double the percentage of Bernie supporters. And I also want one more point about how they voted in the general election. 9% of the people, Democrats, who voted for Obama in the primaries, voted for John McCain. So it's not always a rational process. You know, what motivates them might be emotions, it might be propaganda coming from the television, who knows? But it's party loyalty or party disloyalty didn't begin with Sanders-Trump voters or Bernie or bust. It began at least in 2008 when the so-called party unity my ass Clinton supporters voted for McCain. They had a PAC set up too. And I wouldn't have been surprised in 2016 if they would have rose up again, had Bernie been able to actually get enough votes to win the nomination. I think they would have sabotaged Bernie in exactly the same way the Sanders-Trump voters sabotaged Hillary Clinton. I think that these party unity my ass folks would have actually voted directly for Donald Trump the same way they did for McCain. But that's in the past. And the question that needs to be asked is, so what? That was 2016. This is 2020. After 3 years of Trump, surely these swing voters know not to support Trump. So in
You don't think
April,
so?
here it is. In April last year, an Emerson College poll showed, and this got a couple headlines around the internet, 26% of Sanders supporters will vote for Trump if Elizabeth Warren, is the nominee. Even though she's supposedly close to his policies, his social democracy, or what, you know, his progressive agenda, they won't vote for her. They're going to vote for Trump. And that's a fairly small sample size, so it's a margin of error about plus minus 10%. That was April. In November, a Business Insider poll had a headline that was, I swear, designed to confuse the readers. 2/3 of Bernie supporters will vote for Warren in the general election. That was the headline. But the news is 33% of Sanders supporters will not vote for Warren. 33% is larger than the 26% of the Emerson, because Emerson, they're going to vote for Trump. 33% is they're not going to vote for Warren, meaning someone will vote for Trump, someone will vote third party. They include the Bernie or busters and the Sanders-Trump, so it's a larger percentage. And the reason it's news is because in 2016, the contest was close enough that the 12% mattered.
Yeah.
They swung the election. So just a kind of a footnote on these percentages. Because the percentages are a lot higher, 26% versus 12%, for example, doesn't mean that the number of people are any higher. Because Bernie Sanders' support at this point is about half what it was by the end of the primary season. It was 13.2 million people voted for Bernie in the primaries. So 12% of them is about 1.5 million. So 24% of half that number of supporters now, roughly, according to the polls, is still 1.5 million people, roughly. The number of people who are swing voters, Sanders-Trump swing voters, hasn't doubled just because the percentage has doubled. They're about the same as they were in 2016. And they swung the election in 2016, and they're telling pollsters they're going to do it again.
I'm wondering whether the candidates themselves have any agency here. Do the voters even listen to what the candidates say?
Apparently not.
In 2016, at the Democratic Convention, Bernie got up on stage and lifted up Hillary's hand and suggested all his supporters should vote for her.
Correct.
But evidently they didn't all listen. They didn't all obey.
Clearly. I mean, we made it very clear in Philadelphia that we weren't going to be supporting. This is the Bernie or Bust faction that we weren't going to be supporting. We had a billboard on the highway between the airport and downtown that said nominate Sanders or lose in November. And we didn't have any polling to back that up. That was bluster. That was pure bluster. This time around, we know if they don't nominate Bernie Sanders, these swing voters are going to once again vote for Trump and they're going to lose. The fact of the matter is, because of these swing voters, as long as the economy remains in good shape, as long as the unemployment rate stays low, like it is now, these swing voters have already decided the outcome this year. Either Bernie Sanders is the nominee for the Democratic Party or Trump will be reelected.
So only a crash of the economy could change their mind?
Because unemployment goes up. So the statistic that I have in mind, and you actually hear this on television from time to time, is since World War II, 10 presidents have run for re-election. 7 of them have won re-election. The 3 that didn't all had high unemployment. The 7 who did had lower unemployment, either low unemployment, or in the case of Ronald Reagan, it was over 7%, but he got elected when it was over 11%. So the unemployment rate was moving in the right direction, and the voters gave him a chance to keep moving it down in the right direction. So they all had good employment numbers, even though, as Bernie Sanders points out, the economy's not good for someone working 2 or 3 jobs and they don't have health care. That's not working for everybody, sure, clearly. But it's working for enough people that this election is going to be close. So an Emerson College poll in November, another Emerson College poll, matched up Bernie with Trump. How did that come out? Bernie won by 1% in that poll. Biden versus Trump, even.
Yeah.
Warren versus Trump, Trump by 1%.
Did they break it down by electoral votes?
They didn't break it down by state, by swing vote. This is a nationwide thing. The point is, it's going to be close. And the reason it's going to be close is because unemployment rate is very low. So how do you defeat you have to have a unified party. That same poll that showed those 4 matchups, Buttigieg was the other one, and he clearly lost to Trump. But further down in the poll, the post about that poll, about that month's polling, they talked about party loyalty. 93% of Buttigieg's supporters are very likely to support the nominee. 20% or 80% of Warren's are very likely to support the nominee. 70.
The question was, if it's somebody else.
If it's somebody else, will you support the nominee? 77% of Biden's supporters are very likely to support the nominee. 61% of Bernie's supporters are very likely to support the nominee. He has the greatest amount of party disloyalty, which means if he's not the nominee, the party will not be united. And if he is the nominee, he's the candidate who can unite the party better than any other candidate because of that set of statistics that I just read. He's the only one. If the race is tight enough, if this contest is close enough, where the swing voters in swing states rule, okay, I'll vote for Bernie in the general, but I'm not, if he's not the nominee, I'll vote for Trump. Those voters have already decided if Bernie's not the nominee, Trump gets reelected. So if Bernie's not the nominee, Donald Trump will be reelected. That's not reading tea leaves. That's not conjecture. That's a foregone conclusion based on the survey of the 2016 election and voters and the polls, 3 separate polls in 2019 that confirm Bernie has the most electoral leverage. Some people may not like that term because they don't like being told who they have to vote for. But the fact of the matter is, almost 70% of Democrats' number one concern when they vote is to kick out Donald Trump. They'll vote for someone whose policies they don't agree with, if that candidate has the best chance of defeating Trump. I'm so certain about that conclusion, that only Bernie Sanders can defeat Trump, that I will wager up to $1,000 to anyone. If Biden's the nominee, Trump gets reelected. If Warren's the nominee, Trump gets reelected. If Buttigieg or Booker or the billionaire gets elected or nominated, Trump gets reelected. I'm certain of this because of what these polls, because of what we saw happen in
Mhm.
2016, because it's going to be a close race. Let's say there's a stock market crash. Let's say
Yeah.
it's not close.
Yeah.
Because of the same data that I cited just now about very likely to support the nominee or not very
Mhm.
likely, Bernie still can unite the party better than anyone else. That is his thing. And one more thing about Bernie Sanders. If you're going to defeat an incumbent president that has low unemployment, you have to do two things. You have to unite the party, but that's not going to be enough
Mhm.
because Trump has a lot of support. By the way, his approval rating right now, Trump's, is the same as Obama's at this point in his reelection bid. So don't underestimate this president just because you don't like him. He's got great skill at selling himself. And the other thing that Bernie brings to the table that no other candidate does is his quote unquote political revolution. What that means is he's going to motivate people who don't normally vote. Working people, poor people, poorly educated people. Millions of Americans don't vote in this country. But he got elected to mayor of Burlington by getting these people out and getting them registered to vote, and they voted and made him the mayor. His
Well,
political revolution is nothing more than motivating non-voters to come out and vote.
well, in Burlington, he could do that by going to see people and talk to them. And
Right.
can he do that on a nationwide basis?
Bernie has something, again, no other candidate has.
Mhm.
Actually, two things.
Yeah.
One, an army of 1 million volunteers. Every night you see people saying, hey, get on and start calling people. Or canvassing. They're going
Mhm.
door to door. So he has this army of 1 million people no other candidate does, and they have what's called Burn App. This in 2016, Sanders used the DNC voter database, and there's a big problem when the firewall went down, and they blocked him from using the database for a while, and there was a lawsuit and this and that. This time around, he said they learned their lesson. They went out and bought their own voter database, national database, every voter, every registered voter in the country.
Mhm.
And this Burn app, which you download to your phone, is linked to that voter database. So when you meet somebody on the street, you enter their information, you update them. Who's your first choice? Who's your second choice? Are you registered to vote? So that's how he's finding these people. He's got an army of volunteers finding these non-voters. Are you registered to vote? Do you know about Bernie's agenda? He wants to raise the minimum wage, working class stuff. He wants free college, right? These are poorly educated people. They'd go to college if they could afford it. They can't afford it because they want to improve their lot in life. They're not poorly educated by choice. They're poorly educated because they could never afford to go to college. He's offering them an opportunity to go to college or trade school or community college. All that's included in his free college program. So they'll come out and vote for somebody. And there's a study that was published in 2018 by French political economist Thomas Piketty. And he showed, studying 70 years of voter behavior in the United States, France, and England, he showed that these voters, these non-voters, will come out for a social democrat, somebody like Bernie Sanders. So that's what Sanders brings to this possibility of defeating Trump. One, uniting the party like no other candidate can, and two, broadening the party to include people who give up on voting because they're tired. They don't want to vote for these neoliberals and this corporate-oriented policies that have been coming out of Washington for 4 decades now. So, but they'll come out for someone like Bernie Sanders.
Well, this is interesting for the DSA to hear, among other things. I don't know if you were following at the DSA National Convention last summer. A resolution passed that said we're endorsing Bernie, and if he isn't chosen, we're not going to endorse any other candidate.
What was the name of that resolution? It was called the Bernie or Bust resolution.
Mm-hmm.
By our standards, it was pretty weak tea,
Uh-huh.
right? Because it didn't say anything about how you'll vote. It just says who you endorse. And frankly, I doubt Elizabeth Warren wants the endorsement of a socialist organization. Right? That's not going to, in her view, that's not going to help her with moderate swing voters. Another thing about Bernie's agenda is most people support it. Most people support action on climate change. Most people support free education, free college, free trade school. Most people support raising the minimum wage. Most people support Medicare for all. His agenda is populism. Real populism. So if he's the nominee, you're going to have genuine populism versus fake populism. You'll have honesty versus dishonesty. You'll have climate action and climate preservation versus, in my view, human extinction. That's what's at stake in this election. I know there's a lot of policies out there that people consider more important, like Medicare for all. And for people who don't have health care, obviously that is very important. But the fact of the matter is, if we don't do something about climate change, and we're very late in this game, it's not enough. Green New Deal, as big as he's proposing, $16.2 trillion of spending, as big as that is, that would have been sufficient 40 years ago. Transforming the energy sector from fossil fuels to sustainable batteries and hydrogen and wind power and everything else. But it's not now. There's too much carbon in the atmosphere. We also need carbon capture. And even if you have that 100% accomplished, if carbon were to come down to, below 350 parts per million, which is supposedly the threshold, you still got way too much methane that's been released due to fracking, due to leaky gas pipes, due to the 1.5 or close to 1.5 degree Celsius warming that's taken place. There's methane leaking all across the Arctic shelf. It's just bubbling up. It's evaporating and bubbling up out of the water. That's underway. There's multiple positive warming feedback loops in place, which means we're very late in this game. It's not enough just to transform the energy from fossil fuels to green. It's not enough to capture carbon, which is growing trees or creating these massive wood floats to grow seaweed out in the ocean, right? That's a carbon sink. That'll suck up carbon and turn it into oxygen. It's not enough to do those two things. We also have to cool the planet. That's the only way we're going to be able to stop this positive feedback loop. They're already in place, right? The forest fires in California, in Brazil, and in Australia, of course. That's leading to more heat in the atmosphere, more carbon in the atmosphere, which is going to lead to drier conditions and warming atmosphere, which is going to lead to more forest fires, which is going to lead to more warming and more forest fires.
So it feeds on itself, yes.
The Arctic ice is another one.
And I can say that
it melts.
Yes.
So the ocean absorbs more heat.
Yes.
Melting more ice, meaning there's more ocean showing during the summer, absorbing more heat. Melting. That's a positive feedback loop that's in place.
Okay, so I can say I'm conscious of this, but if the Democratic National Committee is not conscious of it, and if your swing voters who would swing to Trump are not conscious of it, then what do we do?
Nominate Bernie. Those swing voters will come to Bernie. That's been resolved. The problem with climate change isn't the swing voters who already made up their mind. They're going to go with Bernie. It's the independent voters who, most of them are telling pollsters they're going to vote for Trump, and still Bernie in polls beats Trump. They're the ones who have to be enlightened and made it very clear that in this election, it really comes, and this is true whether it's Bernie versus Trump or Bernie versus Buttigieg or Bernie versus Biden or Bernie versus even Warren. The only candidate who is proposing sufficient response to climate change to actually preserve the climate, besides Bernie Sanders, is Andrew Yang. So it's going to be either, from a climate perspective, it's going to be Yang or Sanders, or we burn.
Okay, well, beginning to sum up, how can you bring this to the attention of politicians?
So the idea is to get the media to cover the story. That fact, these polls show only Sanders beats Trump. You're not going to hear this on MSNBC, though, because they don't care if Trump is reelected. They don't want Bernie in there breaking up the media monopolies. They prefer Trump over Bernie. So you're not going to hear it on MSNBC. You're not going to see this discussed on CNN. This has to go out social media. You see this somewhere online. Again, climate2020.us has this all laid out. You can share that video. You can share that website. We have to get this in before, not the DNC. They don't care. They'd rather have Trump than Bernie Sanders. Most of the elite would rather have, the Democratic Party elite would rather have Trump than Bernie Sanders. But the rank and file Democrats want to defeat Donald Trump. That's their thing. They want to pick the candidate who has most likely. And the fact is, polls are telling us that Bernie's not the most likely. He's the only one, as long as this remains a close race, he's the only one who can defeat Trump. So how to get that out to them? Share this video. Share this program. Share this information. Share climate2020.us. Share it across social media. Share it in emails to your aunt and uncle out in the Midwest. Get this information out, because even supposed progressive media, a lot of that, the Humanist Report, Rational National, and Kyle Kalinske, are all on the payroll of the DNC. They're not talking about the Sanders-Trump swing voters. So it's important for truly independent media like this and listeners of this media to get this information before Democratic Party voters. Because if Bernie doesn't go into Milwaukee, I think is where the DNC is this year, if he does go in there with 50% or more of the delegates, Trump's going to be reelected. There's absolutely no doubt about that, unless there's a market crash.
Okay, that's the prediction you're leaving with us with. We've been talking to, let's say, political analyst and political activist Victor Tiffany. This has been the Ithaca DSA Presents program. I'm Wales Brown. Thank you all.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.